do it.
Woo!
All right,
Macronutrients,
here we
baby.
go, macronutrients. Okay, so what we're gonna go over today is just your basic nuts and bolts, proteins, carbs, and fats. Okay, this is totally, just square one nutrition. Okay, and as you start tracking your nutrition and you start trying to look into these things, this kind of shows you what it means. Like when you read a label and you look in there, it says proteins, carbs, and fats. Okay, and normally I would go through this and go, okay, what are good carb sources? What are good fat sources? Those kind of things you can find on like Paleo Diet Startup list or any of those food lists. Because most foods have a little bit of a mixture of all of them. You can look at there and you start looking it up. And nowadays you can look up any kind of food that you can think of, right? You can find it, is it protein, is it a carb, is it a fat? Or is it, is it a very protein heavy source? Is it a good protein source, or is this a waste of my time? Because you'll read a label like, I was using the example of Special K cereal earlier today, because it's always, oh, it's a good source of protein. And then when you really look at the ingredients, there's like 3 grams of protein here.
How could they say it's a good source of protein then? Because maybe
'Cause
it's
they
more
can
than,
say
maybe it's
whatever.
more than like Cocoa Pebbles.
Because they
or
can
whatever.
say whatever they want.
There you go.
That's one of the things about labels is like the buyer beware, because we don't have anything, and then you can say healthy on a lot of things. You can say healthy, that you can say all natural. Those labels mean absolutely nothing, right? I don't know, good protein sources as opposed to a bottle of water, but that's not it, right? To
It's
just
all relative.
oxygen.
Yeah.
So proteins, number one. It's priority number one. That's why I have it on there the first thing. It's part of tissue repair and regeneration for everything. Everything that your body works off is protein. We are nothing but animal protein. Okay, we're an animal. That's what we're built of. It's priority number one in all meals. That's I always like to emphasize that when you're making a meal or you're planning a meal, think about what your protein source is going to be first, then everything else around it. It's building and maintaining all tissues. So if you're deficient of protein, your body's going to be deficient of one of the primary nutrients, the sources, protein. There's 4 calories per gram in protein. So if you're looking at calories and things, or trying to figure out the percentage of calories that a particular food might carry, kind of caloric value, whether it's a heavy protein food, or it's a heavy fat food, or a heavy carb food, it's 4 calories per gram. The guideline that I like to tell you, if you don't take anything else away from today, is this one. Try to get 0.75 to 1 gram per pound of body weight of protein per pound of body weight per day.
It's hard to do unless you're planning. You can't.
You have to do it, yeah.
Yeah,
You gotta think about it. Okay, so that means if I'm if someone's 120 pounds, right? What does that mean? 1 gram of protein would be 120 grams of protein. 0.75 would be what? Somebody really good at math. 3/4 of that is
90 grams?
yeah, like 90 grams or so, 95 grams. Yeah, about 90 grams. So about 90 grams of protein. Somewhere in that range is where you're going to want to shoot for every day. And what you want to do is you want to prioritize that. So if you're, if you get a lot of protein sources, that's going to be the hard part. And for someone who has sort of a weight loss goal or something like that, I just tell them that, because you eat that, and you're not gonna.
Well, you're not gonna be hungry at
I
all.
was gonna say,
No.
how could you
You
be hungry
can-
with that much?
You'd be so satiated.
And you cannot overeat a protein source. That's the other thing about it. So, as especially when you start looking at any kind of natural source, right? There's just no way. I mean, it's actually kind of hard almost for someone to eat that much, especially if you're eating really lean protein sources.
Yeah.
To get enough calories sometimes if you're really eating lean sources. But if you're eating, because you're so satiated, you don't want to eat anymore.
Mm-mm.
I mean, for me, that's like 3 pounds of steak or something a day. I can eat like 2 pounds easy, but I mean, that's like, it's a chore.
Yeah.
And people don't have to necessarily get quite that much, you know, I mean, but you know, if you are eating really low carbohydrate or low, and you're doing that, then your body can use a little bit of that for fuel, but not much. It's a very inefficient method of doing it.
Protein is.
Yeah, it's very efficient because it's got a much more complex molecular structure than protein, than fats or carbs. Carbs are like the simplest, right? Carbs burn up.
It's like kindling, huh?
Burn up like kindling, and that's your most readily available source of fuel. So if you got carbs in the tank, you're not going to start dipping into protein. Or if you got fatty acids to burn off, you're not going to dip into the protein tank as long as you got that. Now, animal sources are the best because that's what we evolved to eat. You know, we've got 1 million years of evolution telling us that that's what you should be eating. It was almost impossible for a human being to eat like a vegetarian or vegan diet until about the last 100 years. There's just almost no way. Now, I'm not saying that you can't do it. There was, you guys have both seen the little diagram that I made one time with the little circles and the different colors. Did I ever show you that?
I don't know if I've seen it.
Well, basically, I can do a real quick Reader's Digest version of this.
Are you good about watching your protein?
Huh?
Do you pay
It's
attention?
hard. I try, but it's difficult for me to get enough protein. Like, if I'm gonna try to get that much in, that's a lot. I can't eat
What's
that
that?
much. I can't, like, I find it challenging to eat 1 gram of protein per pound a day.
It is
A
hard.
lot.
I'm curious about your meal prep strategies, Jim. I mean, and it maybe not for this talk, cause I know you
Yeah,
have
no,
things
it's
you
okay.
wanna cover, cause you know, like, how do you get your proteins in? Do you put a bunch of stuff in the crock pot? Do you grill on Sundays so you can get out
No,
more
I just,
stuff?
I honestly, now, I spend time cooking every day, and usually I'll make like a big dinner or something, and then the next night, or the next day I'll have something for lunch, and I only eat like 2 big meals a day.
Uh-huh.
So, but I also, you know, I kind of enjoy cooking.
I do too, I like it as well, especially when I have time.
Right, so it's kind of a thing, you know, that I like to do. You'll find a lot of people get into that. That's one of my things, or I'll just snack, and usually I'm like the kind of person who'll eat like 1 big meal a day, and then maybe lunchtime is just a snack or something that's left over. Like if I grill a bunch of chicken breasts or I grill something like this, then I'll just warm a little bit of that up and eat it at lunchtime. Okay, so this deal right here, I'll try to be as fast with this little presentation as I can be. But see how I got all these colors? This is like an amino acid profile of an animal protein. Okay, so we've got all these different aminos. There's like 15 or something of them. I can't remember the exact number. But we got, you know, like leucine, isoleucine, valine, you know, you've got, you know, tryptophan, we got carnitine, we got all these different amino acids in there. We are, in order for us to have that protein very bioavailable for us, we have to have all those, okay, or else that protein is not a good protein source. And if I go, let's say, if I get a good protein source like beef or chicken or salmon, those are like the top. Beef or salmon are usually like, that's like the top of the food chain, right? Or something like that. Then we're gonna have all these in there. But say I go with something like soy protein, then it might be 3 of these and 3 of those. So I don't have all those links in the chain
Yeah.
that are
complete.
required to build protein. Amino acids are building blocks of what full proteins are. Okay, so if I got that, then I'm not, even though I've got the same number of chains of links on the chain, they're not all the same. Okay, so in order to get some of those other colors that I have to have on there, then I'm gonna use some like soy protein. So then I'll have like some rice protein. Okay, and rice protein has a few more of them. But still not all of them. And then like I take another one, let's say I have, what's another one that's out there? Peanut protein, okay? Or let's say beans, right?
Yeah,
So we'll do-
beans, yeah.
That's a popular one. That one or pumpkin seeds, right? That's a good source.
I didn't know that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, pumpkin seeds are good. Okay, so now I've got all of those colors.
Right, and 3,000 calories.
And exactly, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's exactly how that works when it comes to an animal protein versus another one, okay? And one of the best, books that comes out that is basically a defense of all that is this book that's come out recently, Sacred Cow. They talk about this, basically in defense of beef protein.
Mm-hmm.
And they outline this in here. I even memorized the page number of some of these diagrams they have on there about the number of calories that you have to eat in order to do that. And I'm not saying it's not impossible, it's impossible to do. Because, the stereotype is that the vegans are all people that try to go that route are weak, and you can see an example of somebody who's not that way, right? They usually have to supplement and use all kinds of different things. But you got calories needed to eat 30 grams of protein is, like we take roast beef, you got 210 calories.
Mm-hmm.
Cod, cod's pretty lean fish, right? 137 calories. Roasted chicken, 167 calories. We go up into here, peanut butter, you gotta have 706 calories with peanut butter.
That's a lot of peanut butter.
It's a lot of.
Yeah.
A lot of
You gotta
calories.
drink 720 calories with a soy milk, okay? And, black beans, 440 calories.
You know how terrible you'd feel after
You'd
eating
feel
all that?
horrible. You'd just
Just
be,
you
well,
reading that makes me go.
you'd be eating all damn day too. That's the thing. And then you're gonna be getting a bunch of carbohydrates in those, and you're gonna be eating a lot more calories. So therefore, a lot of those people are very protein deficient because they're not getting all those things, right? Unless they're just meticulous. I know of a vegan guy, Mike Mahler, who's beastly strong, and he's, extremely strong and apparently really healthy. And I've learned a lot of hormonal stuff from him, hormonal balance stuff, because he's given some really good presentations on it that are on that. But he has to, when I hear about some of his nutrition stuff, he's got to make these shakes with coconut oil, and he uses a hemp protein, pumpkin seeds, and we'll have all these different seeds and legumes and all. And it's like, man, and he's got to be like a scientist to come up with that stuff. Maybe it gets easier after a while, I don't know. But anyway, animal sources are your best. You can't overeat them. The best is to get protein from a variety of meats and fish, and not just, you'll see the bodybuilders out there that are just like, okay, chicken breasts all day long or whatever, and that drives me crazy. You gotta make food so you like it, okay? And you gotta find different protein sources work differently for different people. I don't seem to do as well on pork and lamb as I do on beef, And even that, I'll get sick of it after a while, and I'll be like, okay, I want some fish now.
Mhm.
I want some chicken. You know, so you gotta mix that up. And not only that, one of the things to look at is also, you know, think about, look at the way people eat in different cultures, you know. In America, we pretty much think of meat, and we think of a steak, or we think of a hamburger, or we think of, you know, a chicken breast or whatever like this. In a lot of other countries, people eat all kinds of stuff, and organ meats are not off limits, you know, liver, that's huge. If you look at any kind of, like, you always hear stories about the Native Americans, okay? Plains Indians, I mean, they eat every part of the buffalo, right? The whole thing, all that stuff, all that organ meat is really good for you for a lot of different reasons. For your, you know, like, it's good for your hormone levels, it's good for your brain health, and all those kinds of things.
Good for your adrenals too.
Yes, good for your adrenals, you know, thyroid health. Oh my gosh, there's so you could go way down into that when you start looking at the benefits of organs for every tissue of your body. So that's something really good. I'm not like a big liver fan and all that stuff, but I do kind of supplement with some stuff that's beef liver tablets, and I've been getting a little more into it, a little more adventurous with it. But I mean, like, you know, you've talked about the stuff that, think about what your grandma and them ate. I mean, it's not, there's nothing gross about it. We just think we just don't eat that stuff,
Yeah.
right? And we would eat exclusively muscle meat.
Yep.
And that's actually not a very healthy way to eat, because it's really lean. It doesn't have a lot of those other vitamins that we need. You know, you need like the vitamin A and vitamin E and all that kind of stuff that comes from a lot of those things are important for brain health, important for everything else. Now, one thing I like is to choose natural sources, if at all possible. And I usually tell people, and neither of you guys have weight loss goals, so it's a little different. But I tell people, don't drink calories. You know what I mean? It's easy to get your protein grams if you know, we were talking about 100 grams, 150 grams of protein or whatever, 120. It's real easy to do that if you're drinking protein shakes every 6 hours, right? But it's not possible to do that eating. And if I have somebody who's, let's say somebody wants to lose 20 or 30 pounds, I'm like, eat. There's a reason we eat, right? Because the digestive process starts when the food hits your mouth. And as you're chewing it.
I never feel full on a protein shake.
No.
I mean, and maybe I'm unusual that way. Even if it's got a lot of protein, I just don't feel particularly full.
No.
Mm-mm.
Do you feel that way
No.
too?
Yeah,
No.
it's like,
And a lot of those
Hungry an hour
proteins,
later.
and you know, like there's different kinds of proteins. There's like millions of them out there. The one that I use every now and then, very rarely, is carnivore. It's beef protein, some kind of like ground up, dried up, ground up meat somehow, and they turn it into chocolate flavored meat. So
Oh, I've had that. It's tasty.
it is good. It is good.
That's the craziest thing.
And you know what's funny about it is, you know, they're not taking ribeyes and throwing in that thing. There's, I mean, like
Right, it's like the stuff that didn't get put in the dog food, right?
Yeah, the stuff that wasn't good enough to put in the hot dog. So but you know, it's funny because I mentioned that to this old school bodybuilder guy that was in a supplement store over in Caldwell, and we were talking about, he was like a bodybuilder like back in the Arnold days, you know, he was like, you know, kind of not like a real bodybuilder,
Yeah.
but he was really into that. And he's like, I mean, he saw me getting that stuff. And he goes, yeah, I swear. And I was getting liver tablets, right? Because they had like these liver. He goes, you're the only person in here like me that ever gets those things.
Mm.
And I was getting that in the carnivore. He goes, I love that carnivore protein because, you know, I used to get that's my favorite kind of protein. And I'm like going, yeah. And I go, well, it is. And I go, it's kind of gross when you start thinking about it. And he's like, yeah, but when I used to lift in this old gym, we always, he mentioned how he felt better. I said, well, they're probably just grounding up all kinds of waste stuff out of the, whatever that they can't use for anything else. And he's like, it was just like clicked in his head about the liver tablets and some of the stuff that they used to use in the old bodybuilding for supplements, and I'm like, hey, this is probably actually better for you than it would be just eating muscle meats. So there's probably a benefit to it.
So then the liver tablets have protein in it that.
A little tiny bit of protein.
Oh, okay.
But it have a bunch of amino acids in them. But it's still better just to eat the stuff. And when I say nose to tail eating, that's a better strategy, right? Okay, and it's, as you guys we were just talking about, it's virtually impossible to eat too much protein. That's why I say make it a priority. Don't go eat. It's because it's easy to eat carbs, right?
It's super easy.
And you could, for most people, if we get into hyperpalatability of foods and processed foods, you could probably be stuffed full of chicken breast or sirloin steak, and then someone brings out an ice cream thing or brings out a donut, you can probably eat it, right? And that goes into the way that they engineer processed foods. Okay, now fats. Don't be afraid of any natural saturated fat or any other fat, okay? Every cell in our body is made of saturated fat, okay? The outer layer of every cell in our whole body is saturated fat. They are the ones that are going to be solid at room temperature. If you think of a steak and you got that marbling on it that's solid at room temperature, that's going to be that. Coconut oil is another example of, usually it's solid at room temperature if you look at it like that. Unsaturated fats are liquid at room temperature, and there's not very many of those that are actually good for us. Most of those ones are man-made, and they are going to be, like your canola oil. And on here we got polyunsaturated fat. The acronym is PUFA, and those are only found in very small amounts in nature. And that not part of any kind of natural diet. Okay, monounsaturated fat with MUFA. Okay, those are like your olive oils, avocado oil,
Okay.
and those kinds of things. Not coconut oil, but olive oil and those kinds of
Avocado oil.
Yep,
Yeah.
those kind of naturally occurring ones. Avocado oil. That's one of those are naturally occurring. Those are not anything you got to worry about really either. Okay. We got trans fats on there. You don't see trans fats much anymore. They were like you always hear about those. But when someone starts talking about fats causing heart disease and causing all those problems, that really is as bad as they say. You don't want to eat trans fats at all. They are like basically destroy everything part of your body. They make your cells basically just die. But all seed oils do the same thing, okay? So, or a lot of the ones that we come out there with, those man-made polyunsaturated fat ones. Trans fats would be like Crisco, and sometimes when you see an oil or a different kind of fat that says hydrogenated on it, that means it's going to be like one of those trans fats.
Was that palm oil? Was palm oil trans fat?
No, it's actually a monounsaturated fat.
Okay.
It's not bad for you in the state, but usually a lot of times you'll see it'll be like hydrogenated palm oil.
Yeah.
Or something like that. When you see the word hydrogenated, what they've gone and they've done is they've altered the molecular structure to it and created it into a toxic substance for you.
Yeah.
So it's different. Processed oils are basically poisons. The main offenders, the ones you're going to run into all the time, are canola oil, soybean, cottonseed oil, sunflower oil, peanut oil, sesame seed oils, rapeseed oil, which is actually canola oil.
That's really rapeseed. It's not a type of supposed to be.
No, it's called rapeseed. One of the reasons they call it canola oil is because they thought that would offend people, so.
Oh, gotcha. Okay.
There's actually a grapeseed oil
Yeah.
too.
Is that one good or not?
No, those are all, they're all the same. I
Okay.
mean, I couldn't list all of them.
Right,
There's
And vegetable oil is.
vegetable oil is one of these.
Yeah.
okay.
Good thing you brought that up, because, and corn oil,
Yeah.
vegetable oil,
Yeah.
almost any, I mean, how the hell are you gonna get oil out of corn? I mean, it's like, you know what I mean? It's like all those things are kind of, yeah, they're weird. You can, and they're highly inflammatory. I'll go into that briefly a little bit later here, and they cause cellular damage and insulin resistance.
Okay.
And how they do that. And the video that I have, that I shared on the blog this week with Dr. Nope, Chris Nope, on that is well worth your time if you want to hear about all this, how that is like, I mean, one of the things that's creating insulin resistance, which is one of the reasons why we're so diabetic and have so many problems with that, is because of the way that that has been encroaching into our normal American diet, especially over the last couple decades, in just massive numbers. And it almost tracks the amount that those things were creeping into our diet, almost tracks a lot of those diseases, like a lot of them with obesity and diabetes. It almost tracks that that curve. So it's pretty scary. So those things are basically poisons. Natural fats, virtually all animal fats, pretty good.
Lard is good?
Lard, yep.
Not funny, it's just like everything, like.
All the stuff, well,
All the stuff we
What
heard
did your
in the
grandma
90s
use?
was like,
Lard
yeah,
on the
that's
beans,
right, that's
and that's what
right.
made them yummy.
Yeah.
yeah,
And I was taught like, do not use lard, it's bad for you.
yeah, well, that's been in the last 30 years though, right?
Mm-hmm.
The last 30 or maybe 40 years now that we've been told that. You think about how long we've been told not to eat that stuff versus how long we have been eating that as humans. I mean, like if you took a yardstick, the diet that we eat now is what would you call the standard American diet now? Basically exists of foods, like if you take that yardstick, right, and you come out about 2 feet and 11.5 inches, and then you take that last little part of it, that's how long we've been eating that. And that's not even, you take like the last millimeter of that yardstick, and if you took our whole evolution as humans, this long we've been eating all these animal stuff and all this natural stuff, and then all of a sudden now, in the last 30 or 40 years, that's like 1 millimeter at the end of it, right? That all of a sudden we've been eating cottonseed oil and canola oil. And
Look at our society, we're so,
yeah, and
Sick
look
of
what,
that.
I mean, you think about the Oregon Trail. I mean, how many folks out here would have made it across?
Jim, what do you, are there certain kinds of animal fats that you prioritize in your own diet?
No, well, yes and no, which I'll get into that a little bit later, is I don't like, I eat fatty stuff, but I don't like go out and seek out fats to add to things.
You're not adding MCT
No,
oils to stuff?
No, I used to use a lot more MCT oil and coconut oil, kind of like almost a meal replacement. But anymore, I don't really even recommend that. I don't recommend people intentionally add fats to their diet. If it tastes good, eat it. If you want to cook something in butter, cook it in butter. If you want to cook it in this, do it. But don't be the person that's putting a stick of butter in your coffee and the MCT oil, thinking that that's going to help you out, because you're drinking 600. Because calories are not. They're not everything you've been told your whole life. It's not just calories in, calories out, but they do matter at some point. It's like they don't matter until they do. Yeah, and when you're drinking, when you if you're doing a nutrition tracker and you look and you're like, man, this cup of coffee was 600 calories. Something doesn't compute here, and there's almost no nutrition in it. There's no nutritional value in this, so this is just calories for the sake of calories. I mean, yeah, it tastes good, but I don't intentionally add those things in there. Now, there's some things that I say about those things. If you're trying to change your meal timing or something, and you're looking at going longer stretches instead of eating like this, those things can be helpful as like a little supplement in instead of having a donut or having a sugary snack or eating something else. They can be good for that kind of reason to offset sugar craving, but I don't add that stuff. I mean, I just, whatever's naturally part of the stuff. I mean, I cook with some coconut oil. Usually the stuff I try to eat is more fatty, so I'll cook with a little bit of that. I'll cook with olive oil sometimes, butter. What else do I use to cover? Bacon grease. You know. Yeah. I'm gonna cook some chicken, I think, tonight with some bacon grease. So we got all those good ones. Omega-6s versus omega-3s. We always hear about how omega-3s are good, right? All those fish oil ads and all that kind of stuff. They're good, and if you're gonna supplement with something, that's fine. You know, take a few tablets of that with there. One of the things that we want to talk about, though, is that the omega-3s are basically anti-inflammatory. Omega-6s are basically pro-inflammatory. We have to have a balance of those, okay? But our natural diet for humans would be much more heavy in omega-3s traditionally than what we get when we start getting all these polyunsaturated fats in there, okay? Because some of those guys in their proper ratio of here should be like 1 to 1 to 1 to 4 ratio of omega-3 to omega-6.
What's an example of an omega-6?
Omega-6 is going to be those higher oleic acid, like, I mean, that'll be like your nut oils and all those kinds of things.
Okay.
Omega-3 is going to be like your, fish oils and stuff that's naturally occurring from like grass-fed meats and stuff.
Okay.
But fish, shellfish, salmon, and any kind of fatty fish. Fatty fish is the biggest thing, like that. I mean, if you think of it evolutionary wise, that's what we're going to be. That's what we would have existed on, right? Because humans evolved along the coastlines.
Right.
If you go back to the Pacific Northwest 500 years ago, where would you find the population?
Yeah, on the coast.
On the coast. There were some nomadic tribes and stuff that would go through this area. We didn't have people setting up shop here. And it's funny because on the Oregon Trail, if you ever go to the Baker, over at Baker City, Oregon, the Oregon Trail Interpretive Center, have you ever been there? Seen that? I love it. I can't wait to get over there again. It's really cool because they have all these full size, like, I don't know what they're like. It's like a wax museum almost type thing of all these settlers on there. And one of the things they have on there is they have these people coming over on the wagon train, and they're trading with some of the tribes on the river. And the first thing that they have these big old slabs of salmon that depicts them like trading them blankets and whatever they had, and they're trading them for salmon. And it's like they're happy. It's like their body is telling them, we need that omega-6 or the hell's omega-3s from that. Our DHA and the EPA that are in those those fish are that's what our body needed, and they were willing to trade anything for that because they've been eating nothing but whatever they could, whatever garbage they could bring with them, which is very little, and whatever they could scrounge for the last 2,000 miles they've been out there. So what we talk about there is the ratio of that. We were designed to run on a 1-to-1 to 1-to-4 ratio, depending on what source you look at. But the thing is now when we start adding those polyunsaturated fats and those other things in there, that the ratio becomes skewed, and instead of 1-to-3, 1-to-1, all of a sudden we're like 1-to-20, 1-to-25, and it starts, and then, so we're in this extremely pro-inflammatory state. And that doesn't even go into the cellular damage and breakdown that those kinds of fats cause, that those kinds of substances cause to our body, because they're like an alien thing, and they actually disrupt the outer layers of the cell itself. So there's lots of things that are bad there. So bottom line is, if it comes from nature, it's usually good. If it comes from a factory, it's probably not. Which that's nothing new, right? Fat has 9 calories per gram.
That's interesting.
Right, so 4 grams for protein, and also carb, you'll see carbs have 4 grams per gram as well, but fats have 9 grams per thing. So it's very satiating, and that's one of the reasons I don't recommend people go and start adding a bunch of fats to things, you know, in your drink, because you pretty soon at 9 grams, there's almost no nutritional value, even though we need them for healthy skin, healthy brain function, we need all that. But all of a sudden, you can get a whole bunch of calories really fast. Start adding fats. So keto diets, you know, there's validity to the insulin hypothesis, and I've taught that a lot about how, you know, you're not gonna. We'll go into that a little more if we go into a keto diet, but you'll see people go into a keto diet and they will like eat fat, and they'll wonder, why am I not losing weight? Well, you know, you're drinking 1,000 calories worth of bulletproof coffees a day and eating nothing but bacon, which is not a very good protein source. I mean, it was like, oh, I can eat bacon. I can eat bacon. It's like, yeah, but there's a lot of fat, but there's not a lot of protein to a slice of bacon. I mean, I like it as much as the next person, but you know, there it is. But you do need fat, and don't be scared of it, because you need it. Okay, if you don't get enough fat, then that's another issue. Okay, then you can have other issues. But if you're not selecting the leanest cuts of meat, and you're really actually doing what you need to do as far as getting a variety of protein sources, and you're not seeking out really low fat ones intentionally, you're probably going to be just fine. Probably you don't need to worry about adding much more. Just use it for normal cooking stuff. Carbohydrates, your elective macronutrient. That means that's the one you can get into when you got all your protein and you've taken care of everything else. Then that's the one you can add to keep eating. And of course, when we go to any kind of list, like look at the Primal Blueprint over there, any of those other things, when I list carb sources, you'll see any kind of vegetables or whatever, usually going to be pretty benign. 4 calories per gram. Now, one of the things that you'll hear people talk about when they rail against the low carb diet is they talk about your brain requires glucose, which is sugar, carb. You break it, a carbohydrate down into glucose is one of the molecules. It does require glucose, but your body can actually make enough from protein and fat sources, okay, through a process called gluconeogenesis, even if you have no carbohydrate whatsoever in your diet. So your body can do that. That's a non-starter right there. One thing evolutionary-wise, we're not designed to have 24/7, 365 access to high carbohydrate, high starch foods all the time. You know, if you think about it from you know, harvest season, when we got, like right now, we got an apple tree in our backyard, right? We got all kinds of apples right now. If you think about that right now, we've had them for the last month or so. They've been all ripe, falling off the tree, all this stuff. But they don't just come out there all the time, and that's one of the problems we have is like a species or whatever. I mean, particularly in America, is that we can go over to the Albertsons here in the middle of January, and I can get a watermelon, and I can get
Strawberries.
and I can get bananas, and I can get all these other things just right down there
Mhm.
that no human ever could have done
No.
150 years ago, you know. So all processed carbohydrate sources, which means basically all the breads, all the sugar, donuts, anything that comes in a box, those kind of carbohydrates are all hyper palatable, which means you can eat way more of them than you normally would, even if you're not full. Even if you're full, you are gonna still be able to eat more. A really cool book that I think is really neat to read here is this one, Wired to Eat. Rob Wolf goes into a lot of that, wired to eat. And when he says that, it's because we're hardwired to eat all that stuff and seek that stuff out and eat it like crazy.
Yeah.
And people who make processed food, make fast food things, and it's not some big diabolical conspiracy, they're just trying to make things healthy and want you to eat it, right? But they make it so you cannot eat enough of it. Like a bag of Doritos, they engineer, I always use Doritos as an example. They engineer those damn things to where they break at a certain point where they're gonna be so crispy that you're not gonna be able to resist them anymore.
Can't eat just one.
Cheetos or those puffs, those
Oh,
cheese
yeah.
puffs, those things, they pump just enough air into them to make sure that you will never be full, no matter how many of those you eat. It's crazy. There's just enough salt, there's enough sugar, other things in them. So carbs equal sugar, so just think about that, okay? Whether it's, a lot of times on labels they'll say carbs or sugars, and it's all confusing. Just look at the total source. I don't even know how they break that down because all carbs are sugar, right? Carbohydrate is sugar, right? Now, one thing you're gonna find is the carbohydrate sources are typically not mixed with fat sources in nature. You're never gonna find a high carbohydrate food that's also high in fat at the same time. Think about a starchy potato or an apple. There's no fat in those. The closest thing you're gonna find is maybe an avocado or some of the nuts out there, but you're not gonna find most of them that are mixed there. We mix them in there to make them really yummy. Carb tolerance is an individual thing depending on genetics, lifestyle, gut health. Your needs for carbohydrate, how hard you're working, how much you're moving around. Hormones, people, different things, metabolic health, sleep, which all turns into sleep cycle and everything else here. And even if you've had a natural birth or a cesarean, that can even impact your gut health and have where your carbohydrate tolerance is. If you've had horrible sleep patterns, that can affect it. If you've had, there's just all kinds of things. It's so dang individual.
I know if I sleep crummy, I eat poorly the next day and I am craving carbohydrates.
Well, they have done studies, even done studies where they sleep studies, they'll take somebody, give them like 4 nights of or even a couple nights of really crappy sleep, and they won't have the glucose, their glucose tolerance won't be the same as if they are, I know you gotta go for too long, but their glucose tolerance will drop way down, like a third, right? And that's particularly bad for people who work night shifts and stuff like, cops and paramedics and firemen and
Nurses.
nurses and all that kind of stuff. Calculate, when you're figuring that out, figure out the total carb, sugar content. Don't confuse the issue with the net carb thing that they put on there. There's a formula for that, but I don't think it really matters. Just go with the total number. That Primal Blueprint carbohydrate curve that you've heard me rail, that's a good guideline to look at. But you gotta track it pretty closely and see where you're at on it. And you're gonna find that if you're eating things like mostly vegetables and not throwing a lot of breads and all those kind of things, it's that carbohydrate curve, it's really kind of almost hard to get over 150 today is, number one, prioritize protein from animal sources, okay? Everybody can do that right now, even think in your head on the way home. Prioritize that, this is something we can do for a day, and then, you know, probably tomorrow, because unless you've had most of your protein already, eating a gram per pound protein at this time of night is probably not gonna work out. Don't intentionally add fats to things, you know, so make it so it tastes good, make it how you like it, but don't intentionally add more. Eliminate all processed seed oils and just go through there and just try to find that stuff out. And one of the things that we found, like on the class that I did, it's a real basic one, that eliminate all corn, wheat, and soy. Soybean oil is like the number one that you're gonna find. Canola oil is probably number two that you're gonna find in all things. Is that when somebody eliminates those things, pretty much all the junk food is like all of a sudden off the table. If you eliminate those seed oils, and you gotta watch it too, like if you go to buy salad dressings, or you go buy any of those things, and they say olive oil on them, right? A lot of times. When you go in there and you look at it, and you really turn it around and you look at it, a lot of times they'll have like a little bit of olive oil, but the predominant thing is canola oil or something. And oh yeah, it's terrible. It's like false advertising. Another thing about olive oil is if you buy some, it's always best to get it from California rather than from Italy or someplace like that. And the reason why is because there was a big old scam going on for a long time, probably still going on, that they were cutting it with a lot of these cheaper canola oils and all these other oils. They were cutting it down, and it wasn't true olive oil. It was mixed because olive oil is more expensive than the other ones, right? But they were still charging it. So if you have doubt about whether your olive oil is really good or good olive oil or not, stick it in the fridge, like it was just refrigerator, not the freezer. And if it solidifies sort of, or gets really kind of milky or whatever, and starts to get really thick and kind of almost hard in there, then it's good olive oil. If it doesn't, then it's probably cut with something else.
Really? I didn't
Yeah.
know that. Okay.
Another thing about reading labels, soy just kills me. And in tuna fish, there's actually soy in a lot of like the Starkist.
Really?
Yeah, I mean things you would think like it's tuna fish. Why would there be anything else in it? Like all the
Oh
one
yeah,
reason to
and
look
wheat
at
is
the
the
label.
other one that you've noticed. If you've ever tried to eliminate wheat out of your diet,
Yeah, you gotta
that's
be
the other
really
one.
careful.
Wheat, you gotta read everything for wheat. So don't intentionally add fats, eliminate processed seed oils, use the primal blueprint carbohydrate curve as a guideline. I mean, it's not written in stone. You know, it's not 10 commandments there, but it definitely is something. One thing I think is important to do though is when you're starting to really make a plan about what you're trying to eat, pick out 5 meals based around a meat, fish, or kind of a fowl that you enjoy. Okay, plan out 5 of them, and then you can start rotating or you start putting other things in there. But plan that out, you know. And like I said, sometimes I make extra, and I'll eat that for like lunch or whatever the next day. And if you really want to get geeky about it, look for a nutrition tracker online and log everything you eat. My preference is MyFitnessPal. There's other ones, and they're probably always coming out with better ones, and that one's, you know, that's probably one of the older ones. I've used it a lot. It's pretty accurate. You gotta be careful because sometimes people will put things in there and you gotta like, okay, is this verified or not? Or is this just something somebody was drunk and put in there? So, well, there's some on there you pretty much, like when you look on there and one's actually, you know, I mean, I'm not a fan of like government health things. Obviously, food pyramid, they're responsible for that garbage, so
Yeah.
we can't really trust them. But I think they're pretty good when something comes from a USDA thing about the number of grams of protein, you know, fats and carbs. I think they're pretty good about that for most food sources. So that's a pretty good one. And nowadays, you have it so easy because I remember when I first started trying to track that stuff, I had a book that was damn near as big as this.
Wow.
It was like, but it was like smaller, but it was really thick. And it had like all these foods listed in it.
Oh
You
my
used to have to
goodness,
sit there.
just look through,
Do the math, no thank you.
searching for it.
So anyway, that's about it, and we've taken almost, that was a real fast overview of these things. I
No, this is
skimmed
good.
through this a lot.
No, I think it's really good. Like for me, the takeaways were like protein sort of equal to the amount of your weight, but
Close
just
somewhere.
simple, like a simple guideline, and there are much better fats to choose. Don't add extra, and like be careful with your carbs.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all good. And I started using MyFitnessPal on your recommendation a
Did you?
couple weeks ago, and it's great because it actually, once you get your foods plugged in, it shows your macros. So it.
Yeah, it does. And mine's funny because whenever I've done that, it like wants to scare you a certain way.
Oh, it does. I know it does.
It looks at me and it's like, okay, you're like 60% protein.
I know. Mine
You're
will do
like
that too.
60%, you're like 50-50 protein fats, you're like, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right.
Good job, Jen.
All
That was
right,
helpful.
thanks.
Good. Thank you, Jen.
That was good. Let's